Human beings can only experience this transcendent reality in earthly physical phenomena. People have sensed the divine in rocks, mountains, temple buildings, law codes, written texts, or in other men and women. We never experience transcendence directly. Our ecstasy is always earthed, enshrined in something or someone here below. Religious people are trained to look beneath the unpromising surface to find the sacred within it. They have to use their creative imaginations. Jean-Paul Sartre defined the imagination as the ability to think of what is not present. Human beings are religious creatures because they are imaginative. They are so constituted that they are compelled to search for hidden meaning and to achieve an ecstasy that makes them feel fully alive. Each tradition encourages the faithful to focus their attention on an earthly symbol that is peculiarly its own, and to teach themselves to see the divine in it. In Islam, Muslims have looked for God in history. Their sacred scripture, the Quran, gave them a historical mission. Their chief duty was to create a just community in which all members, even the most weak and vulnerable, were treated with absolute respect. The experience of building such a society and living in it would give them intimations of the divine because they would be living in accordance with God's will. A Muslim had to redeem history, and that meant that state affairs were not a distraction from spirituality, but the stuff of religion itself. The political well-being of the Muslim community was a matter of supreme importance. Like any religious ideal, it was almost impossibly difficult to implement in the flawed and tragic conditions of history. But after each failure, Muslims had to get up and begin again. Muslims developed their own rituals, mysticism, philosophy, doctrines, sacred texts, laws, and shrines, like everybody else. But all these religious pursuits sprang directly from the Muslims' frequently anguished contemplation of the political current affairs of Islamic society. If state institutions did not measure up to the Quranic ideal, if their political leaders were cruel or exploitative, or if their community was humiliated by apparently irreligious enemies, a Muslim could feel that his or her faith in life's ultimate purpose and value was in jeopardy. Every effort had to be expended to put Islamic history back on track, or the whole religious enterprise would fail and life would be drained of meaning. Politics was, therefore, what Christians would call a sacrament. It was the arena in which Muslims experienced God, and which enabled the divine to function effectively in the world. Consequently, the historical trials and tribulations of the Muslim community, political assassinations, civil wars, invasions, and the rise and fall of ruling dynasties, were not divorced from the interior religious quest, but were of the essence of the Islamic vision. A Muslim would meditate upon the current events of his time and upon past history as a Christian would contemplate an icon, using the creative imagination to discover the hidden divine kernel. An account of the external history of the Muslim people cannot, therefore, be of mere secondary interest, since one of the chief characteristics of Islam has been its sacralization of history. And now, Islam.
Part 1. Beginnings. The Prophet, 570 to 632. During the month of Ramadan in 610 CE, an Arab businessman had an experience that changed the history of the world. Every year at this time, Muhammad ibn Abdullah used to retire to a cave on the summit of Mount Hira, just outside Mecca, in the Arabian Hijaz, where he prayed, fasted, and gave alms to the poor. He had long been worried by what he perceived to be a crisis in Arab society. In recent decades, his tribe, the Quraysh, had become rich by trading in the surrounding countries. Mecca had become a thriving mercantile city. But in the aggressive stampede for wealth, some of the old tribal values had been lost. Instead of looking after the weaker members of the tribe, as the nomadic code prescribed, the Quraysh were now intent on making money at the expense of some of the tribe's poorer family groupings or clans. There was also spiritual restlessness in Mecca and throughout the peninsula. Arabs knew that Judaism and Christianity, which were practiced in the Byzantine and Persian empires, were more sophisticated than their own pagan traditions. Some had come to believe that the high god of their pantheon, Allah, whose name simply meant the God, was the deity worshipped by the Jews and the Christians. But he had sent the Arabs no prophet and no scripture in their own language. Indeed, the Jews and Christians whom they met often taunted the Arabs for being left out of the divine plan. Throughout Arabia, one tribe fought another in a murderous cycle of vendetta and counter-vendetta. It seemed to many of the more thoughtful people in Arabia that the Arabs were a lost people, exiled forever from the civilized world and ignored by God himself. But that changed on the night of 17 Ramadan, when Muhammad woke to find himself overpowered by a devastating presence which squeezed him tightly until he heard the first words of a new Arab scripture pouring from his lips. For the first 2 years, Muhammad kept quiet about his experience. He had new revelations, but confided only in his wife Khadijah and her cousin Waraka ibn Nawfal, a Christian. Both were convinced that these revelations came from God, but it was only in 612 that Muhammad felt empowered to preach, and gradually gained converts. His young cousin Ali ibn Abi Talib, his friend Abu Bakr, and the young merchant Uthman ibn Affan from the powerful Umayyad family. Many of the converts, including a significant number of women, were from the poorer clans. Others were unhappy about the new inequity in Mecca, which they felt was alien to the Arab spirit. Muhammad's message was simple. He taught the Arabs no new doctrines about God. Most of the Quraysh were already convinced that Allah had created the world and would judge humanity in the last days, as Jews and Christians believed. Muhammad did not think that he was founding a new religion, but that he was merely bringing the old faith in the one God to the Arabs, who had never had a prophet before. It was wrong, he insisted, to build a private fortune, but good to share wealth and create a society where the weak and vulnerable were treated with respect. If the Quraysh did not mend their ways, their society would collapse, as had other unjust societies in the past, because they were violating the fundamental laws of existence. This was the core teaching of the new scripture, called the Quran, recitation, because believers, most of whom, including Muhammad himself, were illiterate, imbibed its teachings by listening to public readings of its chapters, surahs. The Quran was revealed to Muhammad verse by verse, surah by surah, during the next 21 years, often in response to a crisis or a question that had arisen in the little community of the faithful. The revelations were painful to Muhammad, who used to say, "Never once did I receive a revelation without thinking that my soul had been torn away from me." In the early days, the impact was so frightening that his whole body was convulsed. He would often sweat profusely, even on a cool day, experience a great heaviness, or hear strange sounds and voices. In purely secular terms, we could say that Muhammad had perceived the great problems confronting his people at a deeper level than most of his contemporaries, and that as he listened to events, he had to delve deeply and painfully into his inner being to find a solution that was not only politically viable, but spiritually illuminating. He was also creating a new literary form and a masterpiece of Arab prose and poetry. Many of the first believers were converted by the sheer beauty of the Quran, which resonated with their deepest aspirations, cutting through their intellectual preconceptions